Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar. I'm going to give 2 minutes for people who might be running a little late a chance to join up. So please bear with me, and I, of course, appreciate your patience. And we'll go ahead and get started at 2 minutes past the hour. Hello again, everybody. For those of you who may have just joined us, I'm giving 1 more minute for people who might be running a little late a chance to join up. I appreciate your patience, and we'll go ahead and get started in just 1 minute at 2 minutes past the hour. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So once again, my name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar. And I want to thank you all for joining me today for today's webinar, CMMC 32 CFR Part 170, the Final Rule Overview and what you need to know. I'm joined today by Kyle Lai and Layla Paoletti, sorry about that, Layla, from KLC Consulting, who'll be doing the bulk of today's presentation. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping details. So today's webinar is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour, and that does include Q&A. Now, you'll be muted during today's presentation, but the questions we're going to be answering are from those that were submitted by participants when you signed up for today's session. If for some reason we do have an outage during today's webinar, just go ahead and try to refresh the page. That should bring you back in. If not, you can reuse that link that you used via email to get into the session. Today's session is being recorded. You will receive a copy of today's presentation as well as a link to the recording. But if for some reason you want to share out with others, or if you lose those links, you can always find this webinar on the Exostar resource library. That can be found at www.exostar.com/resources anytime after today's event. If you'd like to speak with one of our industry experts, if again you lose the link and you want another copy of the slide deck, you can reach out to us in a couple of different ways. You can reach out to us via email at cmmc-team@exostar.com. Or if you come to Exostar's website, www.exostar.com, there's a chat feature there on every page, and we'd be more than happy to answer your questions via that channel as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So today's agenda will get you up to date on the latest ruling around CMMC, with particular focus on the significant changes that have occurred within the ruling itself. And then, as I mentioned, we'll also cover a question and answer. Now, the reason we're here today is because 32 CFR of the CMMC program, that final rule was published in the Federal Registry on October 16th of this year. This is a follow-on, right, to that overall rulemaking process that really kicked off back in December of 2023. That kicked off a public comment period. The DoD responded to those public comments, and that resulted in the final rule being published. Now, there's one more step in this process. That's 48 CFR, also being published in the Federal Registry. I'm going to stop there about this topic because that's what Kyle and Layla will be presenting in much more detail as we continue today. But just to remind everybody, just because CMMC is getting ready to kick off, there are things that you need to be doing today if you've got certain clauses in your contracts, either with the Department of Defense yourself or because you're a subcontractor with somebody that does, right? So if you've got the 252, 204, 7012 clause in your contract, that means that you need to comply with NIST 800-171 Rev 2 if you receive controlled unclassified information. If you've got 7019, you not only have to be compliant with 800-171, but you've also got to do a self-assessment and score yourself on that self-assessment. The guidelines to do that are part of NIST 800-171 Alpha. That's the assessment guide that goes, that tells you how to score yourself. And in that assessment guide, you'll find a scoring algorithm that shows you how to score yourself on each of those different controls, right? There are 110 controls in NIST 800-171. Whether or not you've implemented them, you need to either score yourself or you need to score yourself on that based on that scale. And that scoring system is either a -1, -3, -5, or a 1 if you've got that implemented. So your score is going to range somewhere between a -203 and 110. You've then got to take that score and upload it into the Supplier Performance Risk System, SPRS, because that's one of the scores that the DoD uses when they're evaluating contracts, determining the bids, etc. And that's one of the factors they take into consideration when they consider the different bids. So, just to be clear, right? CMMC, though it's been a long time in coming, it is coming. As Dave McCune says, right, we are moving forward. We fully expect it to be implemented in 2025. And really to take us kind of in depth into that topic, I'm going to turn it over to Kyle and Layla. So I'm going to stop sharing. Kyle's going to take over. So Kyle, go ahead, take it away.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my screen and are you able to see my screen?
Yep, we've got it.
Okay, yeah. Great. Layla, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Kyle, and thank you for the wonderful introduction, Kevin. Good morning or afternoon, everybody. I'm going to start by just giving an introduction about KLC Consulting and our C3PAO organization. KLC Consulting is a CMMC third-party assessment organization, or C3PAO, and we are currently on the marketplace along with the other C3PAOs, the Cyber AB marketplace. We've been in business and been incorporated since 2002, and we have offices today in Marlborough, Massachusetts, as well as in Houston, Texas. You'll see here on this slide that there's a QR code that goes to our assessment page. You can use this QR code and actually get yourself a quote for your level 2 certification assessment. It's an automated quoting algorithm that we have on our website. So check it out. And it's not too early to reserve your level 2 assessment spot today. So wanted to kind of say that's a really neat feature we have on our website, and you can use the QR code here on this slide. Next slide. So yes, Thank you, Kyle, for that. So that was a little bit about us and a big slide about acronyms that we're not going to read to you, but will be part of the slide deck when we send this out. So the first thing I want to kind of delve into here, and an important question that a lot of members of the DIB have are, what is the difference between the 32 CFR Part 170 rule and the 48 CFR? And so this table, I think, does a very good job of just helping that understanding. So I'll really kind of talk through both of these. So let's start with the 32 CFR. Who is the 32 CFR for? Well, it is for the CMMC ecosystem, not just DIB organizations, but also C3PAOs such as KLC Consulting. Who are the two different categories of the DIB organizations? OSA is, of course, organizations seeking assessment. OSC, organizations seeking certification, aka third-party certification. And it's the accreditation body. It's the Cyber AB, as well as the KECO, who manage the training for CMMC. And it's also for the DoD. So this is all out. It's effective, it will be starting on December 16th, which is that 60-day mark after it was published on October 16th of this year. And the 32 CFR does two things. It's describing CMMC and establishing the requirements for contractors and subcontractors to protect the confidentiality of FCI and CUI. And it's also establishing those assessment requirements for the participants of the CMMC ecosystem. So that's where we're at today, and that will become live on December 16th, meaning that C3PAOs, as long as everything is in place as far as the CAP and the EMAS, CMMC EMAS instance, C3PAOs can begin doing certification assessments on December 16th, 2024. Now let's look at the 48 CFR. So again, some confusion here, so we wanted to just start with this. This 48 CFR is really for the government DoD contracting officers because it's prescribing policies and procedures on how to include those CMMC level 2 and eventually level 3 requirements into their DoD contracts. And so when will the 48 CFR be effective? Well, the 48 CFR could be published any day. We are anticipating that it will be between now and the end of the year, but perhaps Q1 of 2025. And then that effective date will be 60 days after that published date. So the 48 CFR will be enacted in Q1 of 2025, we believe. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. This slide is really a little more of a high-level CMMC overview. We included it this morning, though, because there are some changes that we wanted to point out. So there are still 4 types of level of assessments within CMMC. There are level 1 self-assessments. These are for members of the DIB that are only processing, storing, or transmitting FCI or federal contract information. There are 15 requirements there with that level 1 self-assessment that do require an annual self-assessment. Kevin mentioned in entering that SPRS score, right? And then the annual affirmation. Level 2 self-assessment. Some people are not aware that there is a level 2 self-assessment, so we want to bring it up, but I will say it's a very small percentage of level 2 assessments will be self-assessments. Most level 2 CUI categories are associated with the DoD information that is considered critical to protect. And so those are the level 2 certification assessments. But just wanted to put that out there that there will be a very small percentage, 2% maybe, of level 2 assessments that will be considered self-assessments. That takes us to the level 2 certification assessment, which is the bulk of CUI categories, the bulk of organizations seeking certification from a third party or C3PAO. That level 2 certification assessment, as well as a self-assessment, entails 110 requirements that are aligned, of course, to the NIST Special Publication 800-171. Third-party assessment is every 3 years with an annual attestation or affirmation. The level 2 self-assessments are again every 3 years with that annual affirmation. And again, very select programs, very small part of the overall ecosystem. And then finally, level 3 certification will be government-led. These are aligned to the NIST 800-171 and the NIST 800-172, so additional 24 requirements based on 800-172. This is not fully rolled out for level 3, but it will be government-led assessments every 3 years and then the annual affirmation. So nothing really new here, but it's a nice time as we're really leaning into CMMC going fully live to understand the types of assessments that are out there and those requirements therein. A couple other things here. CMMC Level 1 does have a new numbering system, which aligns with the FAR 52-204-21. And there's an example here. So, for example, AC Access Control Level 1-B, and then numbering and alphanumeric nomenclature now. And then CMMC Level 2. So there's still 110 controls, but the FCI portion has now been removed from CMMC Level 2. So a new numbering scheme there as well, taking out those Level 1 controls. Thank you, Kyle. So scoping for contractors and subcontractors, there's a little bit of new information here and updated data here and even definitions, and we'll go into that as we go along here in this presentation. But at a high level, level 1 is FCI, Federal Contracting Information or Contract Information. Level 2 is CUI, Controlled Unclassified Information Assets, as well, and level 3 is as well. And then there's also the other 3 categories: security protection assets, contractor risk managed assets, and specialized assets, which this is not a change. CRMA and specialized assets are not assessed, but they are in scope, meaning that they must be documented in your SSP. They must be categorized as well. If you notice here for level 3, for specialized assets, these will be documented in your SSP and assessed. And then finally, out of scope is still simply out of scope, but those out of scope assets must be identified. Okay, this is a big change here, and maybe an anticipated change for some, but I think overall good news if you're an external service provider. I know this was kind of a hot topic over the last several months as we were waiting for the 32 CFR to be fully adjudicated. But for that final rule, and we're going to talk through this a little bit, the big news piece here is that external service providers and managed service providers, and I'll go through these definitions a little bit, do not by default need to be CMMC Level 2 certified if they are supporting a organization seeking for certification that is looking for CMMC Level 2 certification. But before I delve into this table, I want to just kind of put those definitions out there a little bit more clearly. So if you are an external service provider, you are either a cloud service provider, which is defined in the NIST Special Publication 800-145, or you are a non-cloud service provider, which essentially makes you a managed service provider. So these are all terms that are kind of thrown out there. And again, if you're an external service provider, you're either cloud-based or you're not. And so managed service provider would be the term that's used often. And then there's also a new definition out there called security protection data, a new term, really, which is data that's stored or processed within security protection assets that are used to protect the confidentiality of an OSC's CUI environment, assess environment, CUI boundary. So looking at this table, just kind of go through what these requirements look like, right? So when an external service provider, an ESP, processes, stores, or transmits CUI with or without security protection data, and you are a cloud service provider, those FedRAMP requirements are still in play. That did not go away. So if you're a cloud service provider and you are protecting or processing CUI in any way, you must meet those FedRAMP moderate equivalency requirements that are outlined, will be further outlined in the 48 CFR. If you're not a CSP, if you're not a cloud service provider, then those services provided by the ESP/MSP, right, are in your client's scope, and they shall be assessed as part of the OSA's assessment. So again, not a separate certification and assessment here. You're in scope of your client where you're providing those services. So let's talk a little bit more about security protection data then. So if you are an MSP, that is a cloud service provider, and you are providing services within your OSA's assessment scope, those will be assessed as security protection assets. So kind of looking back at that previous slide or slides that we've talked about, as security protection assets must be scoped as part of the certification, but are not purview to the 110 requirements. So kind of going to the right here, if you are a managed service provider that's not cloud service, again, those services that are provided by you within the OSA's assessment scope are again assessed as security protection assets. And then finally, if you are an external service provider that's not processing CUI or security protection data, you essentially do not meet the CMMC definition of an external service provider, and you're not essentially purview to being categorized as security protection assets or data. Same thing, whether you're cloud or not. If you are an MSP that is not touching CUI or security protection data, then you are out of scope there. Kyle, did you have anything you wanted to add to that slide?
No, I think that you covered it.
Okay, thank you. And we can move on. And then this last slide that I'll cover today is about the implementation. So the real pretty close to what we were looking at before. The main change here is that the phase 1 rollout has been pushed out a little bit. It was a 6-month rollout, and now it is a 12-month rollout. But all to say, the CMMC program commencement date is 60 days after the publication of the Title 48 CFR acquisition rule. So looking at this first section here, the initial implementation again begins at the 48 CFR rule effective date, which we are looking at late 2024, likely Q1 2025, and then where applicable, contracts or solicitations will require level 1 or level 2 self-assessment. So we're looking at level 1 at that point. And so phase 2 then, which will begin 1 year out or 12 months out after phase 1, will begin to add contracts and solicitations to require the level 2 third-party assessment, that level 2 certification rather than self-assessment. Phase 3 is 24 months after phase 1 starts. So that's when we'll start to see the level 3 solicitations appearing in those DoD contracts. And then finally, phase 4, 36 months after phase 1 starts. So again, everything's kind of going back to when the 48 CFR is published and effective. All the solicitations, all contracts will include applicable level 1, level 2, and level 3 requirements as a condition of contract award. I do want to just mention that this is a guideline. It really will depend on your DoD clients, the organizations and agencies that you work with. There's actually the little thing under here in some procurements, right? DoD may implement these requirements in advance of a planned phase, but this is the maximum time frame. So looking again at phase 4, that full implementation will begin 36 months or 3 years after that phase 1 starts. But nothing to say that you might not see CMMC Title 48 language in your contracts earlier than that. And we can go to the next slide. And Kyle, I will go ahead and turn this over to you at this point.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I will cover some significant updates to the final rule. The focus is really what's impacting the defense contractors and the subcontractors. So let's take a look at the first one here. Yeah, so in terms of, okay. So in terms of the first one, there are new sets of CMMC supporting documents on the DoD CMMC program. So you will be able to see there are new CMMC scoping guide, the model overview, the assessment guide, and the hashing guide. They're all available from the DoD CIO website. And there is a definition we just went through, the security protection data. And the third one is the security protection asset and the security protection data. Assessment requirements has been reduced, which means that when you, in the proposed rule or in the past, if you have the security protection data, you have to assess all of the requirements. But in the final rule, the assessor will only assess the requirements that's related to the security protection assets, capabilities, and functionality. Okay, the next one is the MSP that we talked about, right? MSP, if you are an external service provider that is not a cloud service provider, then you do not need to have the CMMC certification, right? And Leila already clarified the CSP and the ESP. So in the past, the cloud service provider, the definition was based on the CISA. In the proposed rule, they were using the CISA definition, which is not a government-wide definition. So they changed it to the cloud service provider, cloud services definition, to NIST 800-145, which means that they're aligned with the government-wide definition of what is considered as cloud services. Okay. The next one is the endpoint hosting the virtual desktop infrastructure, VDI. Client is out of scope, providing there are some clarification I'll go through on the next slide. But basically what it's saying is that if you have a laptop or endpoint with the connection, just a virtual desktop connection to an environment, to a server or to an environment, to an actual computer, and all you do is just showing the screen and have a mouse keyboard movement, but without processing, store, or transmit CUI, you're just having the screen showing your mouse movement keyboard, then you're out of scope. The endpoint is out of scope. Okay. The next one is the level 2 applies only CUI. I just want to reiterate, FCI requirements are removed from the CMMC level 2 certification or assessment guide. When assessors looking at your level 2 certification, we are not going to assess FCI. Okay. Deficiencies, there are actually 3 new terms that were introduced for deficiencies. So which provides flexibility. In the past, if you have a deficiency, you cannot get a 110, right? The SPR score of 110, because if you have any deficiencies, you are marked as POEM item, then you cannot get 110. But there are 2 or 3 terms I'll show it to you in the next few slides. One is called enduring exception. The other one is called temporary deficiency. And there's one more. It's called operational plan of action. I'll go through them, and those allow you to have the deficiencies under certain conditions and still get 110. Okay. And also the duration, Leila already mentioned, is changed from 6 months to 1 year for phase 1, the rollout. Okay. OSC. The next one is the OSC and OSA, organizations seeking certification or assessment, must retain artifacts at a minimum, for 6 years. It's not a change for CMMC Level 2, Level 3 certification. However, this is new for the self-assessment for Level 1 and Level 2. If you are going for Level 1 and Level 2 self-assessment, you also need to retain your artifacts. Everything that you use to do a self-assessment, you must keep them for 6 years. Okay, and the next one is already covered, is the CSP, is aligned using the NIST 800-145. The very last one, the plan of action and the operational plan. So plan of action and milestone is different from the operational plan of action. Like I mentioned earlier, if you have a plan of action and milestone POEM items, POEM-based deficiencies, that means you cannot get, there will be point deducted from your assessment, and you cannot get 110 unless you remediate all the plan of action and milestone POEM items. Where operational plan of action, you will be able to get the 110 or SPR score. Okay, I just want to bring up that CMMC requirements are flow down. There's a flow down requirements for the subcontractors and the contractors and subcontractors for all Level 1, Level 2, Level 3. Although it depends on the type of information that you pass down to your next level down contractors, subcontractors. So there's a requirements that you set the requirements on what type of the different levels of requirements for your subcontractors. Okay, so very quickly, I already covered this, but VDI, you just need to make sure that if you have an endpoint with a VDI client that only connecting to your cloud environment and only connecting to your servers, using the virtual desktop client, then if you shut down, if you just say very limited, I'm only transmitting the keyboard, video, mouse movement, and I'm not processing, store, or transmit, that means that I cannot download files, I cannot print. If I have those type of restrictions set on my endpoint, then the endpoint can be considered out of scope. Okay, and this is big for the OSC and OSAs, because many of the OSC and OSAs, they do have this type of implementation, right? The enclave, especially for enclave solutions. Okay, and I already mentioned cloud service provider is based on NIST 800-145. The big key word here is the on-demand. So you have to look into the definition here, but just make sure that for you to know if you are a cloud service provider, one of the key things is that it will be on demand. That means if I am using a cloud service provider, if I pay them with my credit card or pay the services I want, I should have the services right away. That means on demand. So if you meet that requirements, that means you are a cloud service provider. If not, then maybe you're not a cloud service provider. That's a little bit simple, but you can look into the actual definition. Okay, let's take a look at the deficiencies. I mentioned POEM deficiency, there's no change. You must resolve the POEM deficiencies. If you are if you have a requirements that is missing, that you have not fully implemented or partially implemented, then it's considered the requirement is not met, and you will have a POEM deficiency. You will have the point deducted, as what Kevin mentioned. The different points will be deducted. The associated score will be deducted, right? So you cannot get the 110. You cannot get a perfect score if you have a POEM deficiency. And if you have a POEM deficiency, that means that you have to resolve them. Oh, we will go into the actual, if you have a POEM, if it's allowed, then you will have 180 days to resolve them if you have the conditional status. All right, so operational plan of action, that means that if you implemented a requirement, however, it's out of your control. There's a temporary vulnerabilities or temporary deficiency. That means that I have a patch, but patch may not be available for a certain period of time, right? Then it's not really on me, it's really on the vendor. But we know vendor is working towards the resolution. So I will file this as the operational plan of action. It's different from the plan of action. So with that, I will, as long as I document what is my operational plan of action and the process for documenting, following this, the ways to resolve these temporary vulnerabilities or temporary deficiencies, I will still get the requirements to be assessed as met. Okay. All right. The enduring exception. Enduring exception means that it can be documented in the system security plan, but no operational plan of action is required. So let me give you an example. If you have a, say, medical device, right? There are medical device or some kind of a IoT or OT devices that has been certified. If you say medical device has been certified by FDA or Defense Health Agency or whatever agency that certified it, that includes the operation, that includes the operating system inside this medical device. You cannot just apply the patch to these devices because it must be certified by FDA or the other agencies, right? In that situation, if there is a vulnerability, we know they're on that specific operating system, but we just cannot do anything because of what I just said. In that situation, we'll just document it that, yeah, for this type of situation, we are going to file it as an enduring exception, and then we'll move on, right? And we are still monitoring it until there's a next version, then we'll update, but otherwise there is no plan of action because there's nothing that you can do about it. Temporary deficiency, big example here is the FIPS, right? There are FIPS, 140-2 FIPS validation has been a big problem, 3.13.11, right? If I have a firewall that's currently, I'm using the firmware, say firmware version 1.0, that is perfectly fine. It's all FIPS validated, FIPS 140-2 validation, perfectly fine. Now, I just learned this morning there is a vulnerability, and the firewall vendor just updated their firmware to firmware 2.0. Firmware 2.0, it probably take another 12 months or 18 months to get the FIPS validation. In that situation, I'm going to have to file this as a temporary deficiency under the operational plan of action process. If I file this as a temporary deficiency, say we are watching the vendors whenever the vendor publish their firmware updates, then we are going to apply the patch, right? So if we document this process, documented that this is what we're going to follow, then we'll be okay. We documented this process in the SSP as long as the OSA, OSC follow this process for dealing with a temporary deficiency, the assessor will be able to assess these requirements as met. Yeah. So there are a few, so this is actually a big change in terms of how we see the deficiencies in the final rule. So yeah, so this is big for the OSA and OCs. I'm not going to get into all these definitions, but these are some things that we'll be able to look into. These are the new definitions that are specific to CMMC. Okay, so these are the CMMC status you will see in the contracts, right? And these are the different status you will be able to achieve. Depends on the different contracts. So different contracts, they may have different requirements for what level you need to get in order for you to win the contract award. And so these are different status you will be able to, you will see out there. Okay, very quickly, just look at the different self-assess, the level 1 and level 2, level 3. So level 1, it's not really much changed. You just need to make sure that understand that there is no poem. You must complete all the requirements. Yep, and also the affirmation must be submitted annually, or whenever you updated your information into the SPRS. What we call the affirming official. These are the senior official or the delegated person will need to do the affirmation whenever you have the assessment enter into the SPRS. Level 2 self-assessment. The poem is allowed. You have to do this once every 3 years. Again, like what Leila has said, less than 2% of the contracts, all DoD contracts will be falling into this category. So yeah, don't have a high hope that if you are receiving CUI, you will have the self-assessment. But if you luckily, if you are getting lucky, you have a self-assessment. Poem is allowed for the self-assessment, providing that you have the score of 88 points or higher. Deficiencies are allowed under CMMC, and you can resolve them within 180 days. Then you will get if you don't get a perfect score, you will get a conditional CMMC certification, conditional status, right? Okay, and every time you have the assessment, including the self-assessment and the annual self-affirmation, you need to have the affirming official entering the affirmation into the SPRS. Certification assessment, the difference is that you're required to have the C3PO conduct this once every 3 years. And the information after the assessment, the results will enter into the CMMC version of the EMAS system that's hosted by DoD. And once we enter this, DoD, they are going to verify the assessment results. If everything goes well, the DoD will push this results from EMAS system to SPRS. So the score is really entered from the EMAS system, which is entered by the C3PAO. So, and assessment have to be conducted once every 3 years. And the plan of action, the milestone poem deficiencies are allowed, providing the same condition, 88 points or higher. Deficiencies are permitted under CMMC, and you can resolve them within 180 days, and you will get the CMMC level 2 status, C3PO status. Okay, and the affirmation is the same as before mentioned. Okay, and for level 3 is it's going to be assessed by the DoD, providing that you also have the prerequisite for level 3 is that you must have a level 2 certification that's conducted by C3PAO. Okay, and DIPCAC will assess you every 3 years, and results they will enter into the EMAS system. Less than 1% of the companies, the defense contractors, will be at the level 3, or the contracts. Less than 1% of the contracts will be at level 3, right? And in terms of the plan of action and milestone poem items, they are allowed. the way they do it is that they are going to just look at the 24 and say 80%, which is 20 or 21. The NIST 800-172 controls must be, must meet the requirements. Right? And also, there's a requirement that you also need to make sure that CMMC level 3 also must make sure that CMMC level 2 affirmation, every year you have to affirm that I'm still complying with level 2 and also comply with level 3. If you missed any of this affirmation, that means your certification could lapse and then you're out of compliant with the CMMC. So that is a very big deal for all levels. Affirmation submission to the SPRS is very important. Just make sure that you submitted them on time. Otherwise, you'll be out of compliance. Your certification lapse, that means you will face the consequences of the contract requirement. Okay. All right, and we do have these playbook, available on our website. You can take a look. These are the tools that will help you to look at what assessors are looking for when we are conducting the assessment. And these are explained in very plain English, right? So you will be able to see what we are looking at, if we are looking for the screenshot or if we're looking for documentation, or even which ones, if you have an on-site physical protection, physical presence, on-prem systems, which ones we are going to conduct the on-site inspection. So these are a very good tool that you will be able to take a look at, playbook for the CMMC assessors. Okay, and here's the way you can download. And if you have any questions or want to discuss more about the assessment or the level 2 certification or some of the rules, please contact us. We're here, happy to help.
Great, Layla. Kyle, thanks so much for that. Let me take over sharing here and I'll go over the Q&A. All righty. All right. So as I mentioned, we got some questions submitted before when y'all registered for today. So I picked 10 out of those. We'll get through as many as we can before we reach the top of the hour. So Kyle and Layla, I'll let you guys decide who takes which question. So for number 1, what should I expect from the audit assessment process? How long does it take? Is it on-site, remote? Kind of what's the plan of attack?
I'll go ahead and start and take this first one.
Okay.
So I do think that it will vary very minimally between C3PO to C3PAO based on their organizational processes, but all C3POs will be following the certification assessment process or the CAP. And there are, 4 distinct phases that end with a poem closeout if that's applicable. I can speak to KLC is as far as the on-site or remote, there are 15 practices for level 2 that must be inspected on-site. There is a very small percentage of organizations that may not have anything on site. And so if it would be the case, then it would be a remote assessment. All that being said, ours being KLC Consulting, our assessment process begins about 8 weeks before your certification assessment interviews start. That's when we start to send you pre-assessment forms and artifacts requests. And so that process is very formal as far as scoping, assessment kickoff. Our interview process is a very formal week-long process for the certification assessment itself. But I think that's a high-level expectation because I can only speak to the CAP and that phase process, and then as well as our C3PAO process.
Yeah, and just so that, just a couple of things to add. After we conduct a week-long, usually it's 1 week, unless you have multiple sites that we have to conduct the physical. We will give ourselves 3 weeks to finish up the reports, usually less, but we'll submit the information to the DoD and then inspect EMAS and then put into the SPRS. So the entire duration it's about 3 months. But if you are planning for a CMMC certification, level 2 certification, you probably want to give yourself, 4 or 5 months at least, because there are some C3PO selection and the contract, the signing process as well.
Sure, makes sense. Okay. I'm going to skip number 2 because you actually had a specific slide on this, Kyle, and just because this question also came up. So you will be getting a copy of the slide deck, so that's already covered there. So I'm going to skip number 2. So number 3, what might we need from our suppliers that are tracked on our approved vendor list?
Yeah. So in terms of what you need to do right now is that you already mentioned, Kevin, that there are some existing requirements, DFARS 7012, DFARS 7020, that's existing. And you also need to start reviewing, start asking, when are you planning to get your CMMC level 1, 2, 3 certification, right? Depends on the requirements. Because at the contract award date, if you are a prime, if you are planning to bid on new contracts, say 2026, right, then you need to make sure that your subcontractors also comply by the contract award date, because that is the requirement from the contracting officer.
Absolutely. So just kind of a reminder, everybody, right? You need to flow down these requirements to your subcontractors if you're planning to bid on a contract that requires this. So you need to make sure that they're at that same CMMC level that you're going to be required to do as a prime contractor.
Yeah, absolutely.
We get this a question a lot, number 4. That question of the self-assessment for level 2 rather than getting the C3PAO assessment. What's going to be the difference there, or is there any indication of what that might be?
Yeah.
So I can take this. So I think we covered it a little bit in the presentation, but the requirements are still 110 practices, right?
Right.
And that the main difference, or maybe the only difference here, is that you are self-attesting or self-affirming. You can still have a POAM. You can still get a conditional ATO. You're just not having that formal third-party assessment.
Right.
And again, very, very small subset of the
Right.
DIB will see this in their contracts.
Right.
Yeah.
And guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the other kind of important factor is that the contracting officer is going to make this decision. It's not something you're going to be able to request as part of a contract. The contracting officer is going to make that decision when they let the contract.
Yes. Yeah. You'll be in the solicitation and contract.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So also that question we often get, the CMMC requirements for commercial off-the-shelf distributors. Routinely sell to government military. We don't really get any CUI. What's kind of the expectation for commercial off-the-shelf?
Yeah. So for this one, you have to be 100% COTS, and you cannot self-certify. Say I'm COTS and I don't need to comply, because everybody will be COTS supplier. So you need to talk to your next level up. If you are a subcontractor, talk to your next tier up subcontractor or the prime. If you are a prime, then you have to you have to demonstrate, you have to prove that you are selling COTS. And there is a COTS determination process that you have to work with your next level up contractors, subcontractors, or DoD. So if you are 100% COTS, then you will be exempt. If you are mixed with COTS and the non-COTS, then you will still need to comply with whatever that you need to comply with, because for whatever is non-COTS.
Right.
That's non-COTS.
Okay, great. Short break. Joe, if you could start the exit poll, I'd appreciate it. If you take the time, really appreciate you doing our exit poll. This allows us to understand how we did today. Also lets us, we'll get some solicitation based on topics you'd like to see in the future, and lets us plan our overall webinar series. Also, as you start to get ready for CMMC and your compliance around that, Exostar offers a number of solutions, both software solutions and services solutions to help you get ready. Exostar's CMMC Ready Suite includes our Policy Pro, which is an application which has templates around the different policies you need across those 14 control families for NIST 800-171. Allows you to customize those templates or even import your existing policies and procedures. It'll score those and give you hints and keywords that you may need to use to tune those better for NIST 800-171 itself. The companion product we have around that is Certification Assistant. Certification Assistant walks you through that NIST 800-171. It will score you as you go through the different controls. It will allow you kind of that one place to store all the information. So when folks like Kyle and Layla come to do your assessment, you've got a tool in place that allows you to put your policies, your procedures, your enablement statements, the evidence of what you've done, your recurring tasks, all those things, and really allows you to manage that overall CMMC program. And if you're looking for a secure enclave to store, process, and transmit that controlled unclassified information, Exostar's Managed Microsoft 365 is that FedRAMP moderate equivalent solution from a cloud service provider that can help you on your way to overall CMMC compliance. And then obviously we partner with a number of third parties who offer services around this. This is our relationship with KLC and Kyle and Layla as one of those C3PAOs that are in the Exostar partner network. We also have RPOs that can help you get ready for the overall assessment or help you get over a particular control that you need to implement. Also with this deck, you'll get some links to some helpful information. And now as we get down to the last few minutes, let's go back to the questions. So Kyle and Layla, so will these DFARS requirements be retroactive for existing programs and contracts, or is it really just new solicitations?
So it will be starting with a new certification, new solicitations. But when you get into the I'm sorry?
I was just probably finishing your thought, Kyle. I apologize. Yeah. When we're talking about option years and
option
like
period.
Yeah.
Yep. If you have an option period, that's when the contracting officers will be able to add those in the later dates. So they may not start with something right away, but option year they can add in.
Right, and that's If when you go back to the slide deck and you review, Layla and Kyle had a very good slide on the implementation plan, right? That 3-year rollout, and that is one of the topics that's covered there. Yeah. So as many of you may know, NIST 800-171 was recently revised. It's gone from R2 to R3. So Layla and Kyle, when do we expect the requirement to change with which of the revisions, are going to be required for CMMC? Do we know?
At this time, we are only seeing, it's very clear that the final rule is only R2. It will take a significant rule change to make it R3, revision 3. So we don't know if there's, when they're going to do that, maybe eventually, but at this time, we don't know when they're going to take that step.
Yeah. So if you're focused on kind of getting ready for CMMC, please focus on R2, right? That is the rev that is called out specifically in the CMMC guidance. Okay, I think we got time for one more question, number 8 here. So we have a long-term outsourced IT service provider recently moved us to one of the Azure government clouds. For the can we continue to use our outsourced managed IT service?
Yes, I would say yes, but the IT services, that's when we consider the managed service provider. So they will be in scope, and whatever they take over. So for example, very simple change management, or if they are handling your backup or whatever they do, they must document their process, and when we are doing the assessment, if your IT service providers are providing these services for you, they will be in scope and will be assessed by the CMMC during the assessment.
Great. Well, everyone, not going to be able to get to the last couple of questions because we have reached our time limit. I really want to thank everybody for joining today. Kyle, Layla, thanks so much for your time and so much for your expertise. Hopefully we'll be back talking again soon. And everybody, have a great rest of the day.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Kevin.
everyone.
Thanks all.